Case number 1. Susan Smith. It is every parent's worst nightmare. On the night of October 25, 1994, that nightmare appeared to become reality in the quiet town of Union, South Carolina. A young mother named Susan Smith stood before television cameras, her face streaked with tears, and begged for the safe return of her 2 little boys. For 9 days, America wept with her. The faces of 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex flashed across television screens nationwide. Yellow ribbons were tied around trees. Volunteers scoured highways and fields. Prayer vigils filled churches. The story of a desperate mother, robbed of her sons by a faceless carjacker, struck at the heart of every parent's deepest fear. But what if those tears were not grief, but a mask? Susan told police that while stopped at a red light, a black man forced his way into her Mazda, ordered her out at gunpoint, and drove away with her children still strapped in their car seats. It was a chilling story, one that tapped into racial stereotypes and fears, and it seemed believable. Yet, investigators soon noticed troubling cracks. Her description of the supposed carjacker was vague. Her timeline shifted under questioning. At times she appeared strangely detached, and when given polygraph tests, she failed. Detectives began to suspect that the grieving mother was not a victim at all, but the architect of the tragedy. As they dug deeper, a motive emerged. Susan was entangled in a romantic affair with a local man named Tom Findley, the son of a wealthy textile executive. He had recently broken off their relationship, making it clear that while he cared for Susan, he had no interest in a ready-made family. To Susan, her children had become obstacles to the life she desperately wanted. On November 3, 1994, confronted with mounting inconsistencies, Susan finally broke. In a quiet interview room, Sheriff Howard Wells told her gently, "There was no carjacker." The facade collapsed. Susan confessed. She had driven her children to the edge of John D. Long Lake, placed the car in neutral, and released the brake. She stood and watched as the Mazda slowly rolled into the dark water, her sons trapped inside. For 9 days, while a nation prayed for their safety, Susan knew they were already gone. The trial that followed was a spectacle. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, portraying her as cold and calculating, willing to invent a racist lie to cover her crime. The defense countered with a portrait of a troubled young woman, a history of depression, suicide attempts, and years of sexual abuse at the hands of her stepfather. They argued she was not a monster, but someone broken beyond repair. In July 1995, the jury convicted Susan Smith of 2 counts of murder. Yet, swayed by her traumatic past, they spared her life. She was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 30 years. In 2024, Susan appeared before the parole board for the first time. Tearful and apologetic, she begged for a second chance. But her request was denied, the board ruling that her crimes were too grave for release. Today, Susan Smith remains behind bars in South Carolina. Her story stands as one of the most infamous cases of maternal filicide in American history, a haunting reminder that sometimes, the tears we see are not a reflection of innocence, but of guilt too dark to comprehend. Case number 2, Diane Downs. What do you do when a mother walks into an emergency room with her 3 children, each shot, blood everywhere, and claims it was the work of a stranger? On May 19, 1983, in Springfield, Oregon, Diane Downs pulled into McKenzie-Willamette Hospital, her car soaked in blood. Her children, Shirley Lynn, 7, Christian, 8, and Danny, 3, sat wounded. Shirley was already dead. Christy and Danny clung to life. Diane herself had a gunshot wound in her left arm. She told a story of horror. While driving home with the kids asleep, she took a remote country road. A bushy-haired stranger flagged her down. He demanded her car. When she refused, he opened fire, shooting her 3 children, then herself. She threw her keys into a bush, she said, hoping to distract the man while she could get to a hospital. At first, the world saw a grieving mother in crisis. Onlookers felt both pity and outrage. But the evidence didn't support her narrative. Hospital staff observed that Diane's behavior was calm, too composed for someone supposedly just shot and just lost a child. The physical evidence didn't match her story either. No bullet holes or gunpowder residue where there should have been, inconsistent bullet trajectories, and witnesses who noted the car was moving slowly, contradicting her claim that she raced to the hospital in panic. Investigators found another thread beneath the surface. Diane had been having an affair with a married man, Robert Knickerbocker, who had made it clear he did not want children. He was uncomfortable with her children being part of his future. To some prosecutors, this painted a motive. If Diane's children were gone, there'd be nothing between her and the life she believed she deserved. Meanwhile, Christy, gravely injured and after a stroke, fought to recover not just physically but mentally. For months, speech therapy, physical therapy, signs of trauma. Eventually, she stood up in court and did something few might imagine. She told the truth she remembered. She said her mother had shot her siblings and her, then shot herself in the arm, not a stranger. The trial opened in 1984. Prosecutors brought in psychiatrist testimony diagnosing Diane with narcissistic, histrionic, and antisocial personality disorders. They argued that her version of events was a lie, designed to win sympathy and avoid punishment. Diane's defense tried to cast doubt. Could someone recover enough to lie convincingly? Was there reasonable doubt? But the weight of the evidence, ballistics, Christie's testimony, contradictions in Diane's own statements, was overwhelming. In June 1984, Diane Downs was convicted of murder for Shirley Lynn's death and attempted murder for Christy and Danny. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years, with the requirement that she serve 25 years before becoming eligible for parole. Over time, Diane has made multiple requests for parole. Each time, the parole board found her lacking credible acknowledgement of guilt. She continued to insist someone else was responsible. Parole has been denied repeatedly. Her surviving children, Christy and Danny, were adopted by the lead prosecutor in her case, Fred Hughey, and his wife. They went on to build lives away from the trauma, with the scars, physical and emotional, never far behind. Today, Diane Downs remains incarcerated. Her case stands as more than just tragedy. It's a sharp study in deception, maternal betrayal, and the fragile line between grief and guilt. When a mother's tears turn out to be part of a story she's written, we are forced to ask, can someone who once held the title mother ever truly be free of what she has done? Case number 3, Andrea Yates. A mother's instinct is to protect, to nurture, to shield her children from harm. But what happens when that instinct is consumed by delusion? When a woman comes to believe that killing her children is the only way to save them? On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Andrea Yates, a 37-year-old former nurse and stay-at-home mother in Clear Lake, Texas, waited for her husband to leave for work. Within the walls of their modest home, her 5 children, Noah 7, John 5, Paul 3, Luke 2, and Mary 6 months, played and lived the ordinary lives of kids. By midday, all 5 were dead, drowned one by one in the family bathtub by the hands of their own mother. To the outside world, Andrea and her husband, Rusty Yates, seemed to be living the American dream. He worked as an engineer for NASA. She homeschooled their children and was deeply devoted to her Christian faith. But underneath that surface was a desperate, spiraling struggle with mental illness. After the birth of her 4th son, Andrea had suffered a complete breakdown. She attempted suicide twice, was hospitalized multiple times, and was diagnosed with severe postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. Doctors warned the couple that having another child could trigger another catastrophic collapse. Despite this, Andrea became pregnant again, and the birth of baby Mary sent her into a deeper psychosis than ever before. Andrea became consumed by religious delusions. She believed Satan lived inside her, that she was a terrible mother who had doomed her children to eternal damnation. In her distorted logic, the only way to save them was to send them to God by ending their lives. On that June morning, she filled the bathtub. Methodically, she held each child under the water, beginning with the younger boys. When 7-year-old Noah discovered what was happening, he tried to run. Andrea chased him, dragged him back, and drowned him too. She then laid the small bodies on her bed, covering them with a sheet. When the killings were complete, Andrea called 911. In a flat, detached voice, she said simply, "I just killed my kids." She then phoned her husband and told him, "It's time. I did it." Police arrived to find a scene of horror and a woman completely broken by her own mind. The legal battle that followed divided the nation. Was Andrea Yates a cold-blooded killer, or was she so ravaged by psychosis that she no longer knew right from wrong? In 2002, prosecutors argued that despite her illness, Andrea understood her actions were wrong because she called police afterward. They sought a capital murder conviction. A controversial piece of testimony suggested she may have patterned her plea on a fictional TV episode. The jury found her guilty, and she was sentenced to life in prison. But the story didn't end there. In 2005, it was revealed that the psychiatrist's testimony had been false. The TV episode in question never existed. The conviction was overturned. At her 2006 retrial, a fuller picture of Andrea's mental illness was presented. This time, the jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to a high-security mental hospital, where she has remained ever since. Now in her 60s, Andrea Yates lives a quiet, structured life inside a state hospital. She spends her days creating art and watching home videos of the children she lost. Every year, she has the right to request release, but she has consistently waived that right, choosing to remain in treatment. Her case forced America to confront uncomfortable truths: the devastating reality of postpartum psychosis, the limits of the justice system in cases of mental illness, and the fragile line between maternal love and maternal destruction. Case number 4. Diane Stott, the antifreeze poisonings. In Springfield, Missouri, the Stott family seemed unremarkable, even ordinary. Diane, a church organist and mother of 4, lived with her husband Mark, a local musician, and their children in a modest home. To neighbors and friends, they appeared to be a normal, if sometimes struggling, family. But behind closed doors, Diane was nursing a hatred so cold it turned into murder. On Easter Sunday, 2012, tragedy struck. Mark Stott, just 61, died suddenly. Doctors ruled it natural causes, perhaps heart failure. Diane, the grieving widow, collected a modest life insurance payout and carried on. No one suspected foul play. But 5 months later, tragedy struck again. Diane's 26-year-old son, Sean, who was autistic and had suffered a prior brain injury, was found dead in his room. Once again, doctors assumed natural causes. To outsiders, the Stotts were cursed by misfortune. To Diane, this was only phase 2 of her plan. Her next target was her daughter, Sarah, a 24-year-old college graduate struggling to find steady work while weighed down by student loans. To Diane, Sarah was another burden. In June 2013, Sarah collapsed with severe flu-like symptoms. At the hospital, her kidneys and organs were failing mysteriously. Doctors were baffled. The truth began to surface not from medical tests, but from an anonymous tip. A pastor from Diane's church, disturbed by her callous comments about her husband and son's deaths, contacted police. Investigators brought Diane in for questioning. At first, she played the role of the devastated mother. But under pressure, her mask slipped. Calmly, almost casually, she admitted the unthinkable. She had poisoned Mark and Sean by lacing their favorite drinks, Gatorade and soda, with antifreeze. Her motive? She hated her husband, saw her son as a pest, and believed her daughter Sarah was a financial drain. In Diane's own words, she just wanted to be free. The revelations did not end there. Investigators soon learned Diane wasn't working alone. Her youngest daughter, 22-year-old Rachel, was deeply involved. Rachel confessed that not only did she know about the murders, she helped plan them, and even joined her mother in plotting to finish off Sarah, who lay fighting for her life in the hospital. Police discovered chilling evidence. Diane's personal journal contained disturbing entries, including a countdown to her husband's death. At the Stott home, investigators found bottles of antifreeze, the very weapon she had used. Sarah miraculously survived, though with lasting health damage. In 2016, Diane Stott pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Rachel, who testified against her mother in exchange for leniency, pleaded guilty as well and received 2 life sentences with the possibility of parole. Today, both women remain incarcerated in Missouri. Diane, now in her 60s, lives out her days in prison, her crimes remembered as some of the most chilling examples of maternal betrayal. The Stott case is horrifying not just because of the murders, but because of the motive: a mother who viewed her own family not as loved ones, but as obstacles to be eliminated. A reminder that evil sometimes hides not in strangers, but around the kitchen table. Case number 5, D.D. Blanchard and Gypsy Rose? In Springfield, Missouri, a small pink house became a symbol of love, resilience, and maternal devotion. D.D. Blanchard, a single mother, was hailed as a hero. Her daughter, Gypsy Rose, was the fragile center of that story, a girl in a wheelchair with a bald head, a feeding tube, and a high-pitched voice. To the community, Gypsy was a medical miracle. To her mother's thousands of online followers, she was a child battling leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, and more. Dee was tireless, devoted, a saint in scrubs. But it was all a lie. For years, Dee wove one of the most elaborate frauds in modern history. She convinced doctors across multiple states that Gypsy was gravely ill. Each time suspicions rose, she packed up and moved, starting over with new physicians. In reality, Gypsy could walk. She could eat. She was not sick at all. She was the victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness for attention and sympathy. The abuse began when Gypsy was just a baby. Dee shaved her daughter's head to mimic chemotherapy. She pushed for feeding tubes, oxygen tanks, unnecessary medications, and surgeries that left Gypsy scarred and dependent. For nearly 2 decades, Gypsy lived in a prison of fabricated sickness, believing at times she truly was dying. To outsiders, the Blanchards were inspirational. Habitat for Humanity built them a home. Charities showered them with gifts, free trips, and celebrity meet and greets. Dee basked in the spotlight as the brave mother of a terminal child. But behind the smiles, Gypsy was trapped, isolated, and abused, physically and psychologically. By her late teens, Gypsy began to uncover the truth. She could walk perfectly fine, but her mother forbade her from standing in public. She secretly accessed the internet, where she created online profiles. In 2012, she met Nicholas Godejohn, a man from Wisconsin with whom she began a secret relationship. Their romance turned dark as Gypsy confided her desperation to escape. Together, they formed a plan. On June 9, 2015, Gypsy let Nicholas into the pink house. As she hid in the bathroom, hands over her ears, Nicholas entered Dee's bedroom and stabbed her to death. The following day, Gypsy and Nicholas fled to Wisconsin. The facade unraveled when Gypsy posted a cryptic Facebook status from the shared account. "That be **H is dead." Alarmed friends called the police. Within days, the shocking truth emerged. When officers found Gypsy, she stood up from her wheelchair and walked. The revelation stunned the world. Dee had never been a heroic mother. She was a manipulator who subjected her daughter to years of medical torture. And Gypsy was not the terminally ill child everyone knew. She was a healthy young woman, desperate to be free. The legal fallout was complicated. Nicholas Godejohn was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Gypsy's role was judged differently. Prosecutors recognized her lifetime of abuse and trauma. In 2016, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a 10-year sentence. In December 2023, Gypsy Rose was released on parole after serving 8 years. Now in her 30s, she has become an unlikely public figure, both a convicted killer and an advocate for survivors of abuse. Her story remains a haunting reminder of how far someone might go to escape control, and how evil can wear the mask of maternal love. Case number 6, Tiffany Moss, Imani Moss starvation case. In Lawrenceville, Georgia, 10-year-old Imani Moss should have been living the carefree life of a child. School, play, family dinners. Instead, her final months were marked by hunger, isolation, and cruelty so calculated it shocked even seasoned prosecutors. Imani lived with her father, Iman Moss, and her stepmother, Tiffany Moss, along with the couple's 2 biological children. To outsiders, they were a blended family in a modest suburban apartment. But behind closed doors, a horrifying distinction was made. Tiffany cared for her own children, while Imani was treated as an outcast, an object of resentment, not love. The abuse was systematic. Tiffany began starving the young girl, locking her away in a bare room with little food and no comfort, while feeding her own children regular meals. Imani wasted away in silence, her cries muffled by the walls around her. Prosecutors later revealed Tiffany's chilling mindset. She blamed Imani for her own prior conviction of child cruelty, a case that had cost her a job as a preschool teacher. That bitterness turned to hate, and hate turned lethal. By the fall of 2013, Imani's frail body could no longer endure the deprivation. On October 28, 2013, at just 10 years old, she weighed only 32 pounds, the average weight of a toddler. She died alone, starved by the very woman entrusted to care for her. But even in death, Tiffany and Iman's cruelty continued. Rather than seek help or show remorse, the couple attempted a cover-up. They stuffed Imani's emaciated body into a steel trash can, doused it with lighter fluid, and tried to burn it. When that failed, they abandoned the can in a wooded area. Maintenance workers later discovered the gruesome remains, finally bringing the secret into the light. The legal fallout was swift. Iman Moss, who had stood by as his daughter wasted away, struck a deal with prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to felony murder in exchange for life without parole and agreed to testify against Tiffany. His testimony revealed the depth of his passivity. He admitted he knew what was happening but claimed Tiffany controlled him. Tiffany Moss faced trial alone. What followed was one of the most bizarre courtroom spectacles in Georgia's history. Facing the death penalty, Tiffany chose to represent herself. She made no opening statement. She called no witnesses. She cross-examined no one, not even her husband, who described their crimes in detail. When prosecutors displayed graphic images of Imani's skeletal body, Tiffany sat in silence, her face a mask of indifference. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before convicting her of malice murder, felony murder, and child cruelty. During the sentencing phase, jurors heard a heartbreaking recording of Imani pleading with her father. "I'm hungry. Please don't make me go back." It took them only a few more hours to recommend death. On April 30, 2019, Tiffany Moss became the only woman on Georgia's death row. Today, she remains incarcerated at Arundel State Prison, awaiting execution. Her silence, through trial, through sentencing, through every step, remains one of the most chilling aspects of the case. The story of Imani Moss is not just one of unimaginable cruelty, but of betrayal at the deepest level. A child denied food, denied love, and denied the basic humanity owed to every child, by the very people who were supposed to protect her. Case number 7. Lori Vallow Daybell, the Doomsday Mom case. For years, Lori Vallow seemed to be the picture of a devoted mother. A former beauty pageant contestant with a dazzling smile, she lived in Arizona with her teenage daughter, Tylee Ryan, and her young adopted son, JJ Vallow, who had special needs. Friends described her as vibrant, religious, and loving. But in 2018, Lori's life veered into darkness when she met Chad Daybell, a self-published author of apocalyptic novels and the self-proclaimed prophet of a fringe religious movement. Chad preached that he could see into the spirit world and that he and Lori were chosen leaders destined to guide the faithful through the end times. Together, they embraced a theology filled with visions of light and dark spirits, reincarnations, and zombies. People they claimed were possessed by evil entities. It was a belief system that soon justified murder. The first suspicious death came in July 2019, when Lori's fourth husband, Charles Vallow, was shot by her brother, Alex Cox. He claimed self-defense, and the case was initially dropped. Just months later, Chad's longtime wife, Tammy Daybell, died unexpectedly in her sleep. Though her death was ruled natural at the time, no autopsy was performed. With their spouses gone, Lori and Chad were free to be together. But 2 obstacles remained, Tylee and JJ. In September 2019, both children vanished. The last known image of Tylee was a photo taken at Yellowstone National Park. JJ was last seen at school before Lori abruptly withdrew him, claiming she would homeschool. Friends and family grew alarmed, but Lori deflected with lies, telling some people Tylee was at college, others that JJ was staying with relatives. Meanwhile, Lori and Chad jetted to Hawaii, marrying on a sunny beach just weeks after Tammy's death, even as questions about the missing children mounted. Their carefree wedding photos became infamous, a grotesque contrast to the growing fear that Tylee and JJ were in danger. When JJ's grandparents requested a welfare check, police launched a formal investigation. Lori stonewalled. Under court order to produce the children, she refused. By early 2020, both she and Chad were under intense scrutiny. The case gripped the nation, with one haunting question echoing everywhere. Where are the children? The answer came on June 9, 2020. Acting on cell phone data, investigators searched Chad Daybell's backyard in Rexburg, Idaho. What they unearthed was a parent's worst nightmare. Tylee's remains were burned, dismembered, and placed in a melted plastic bucket. JJ's body was found in a shallow grave, wrapped in plastic and bound with duct tape, still wearing his red pajamas. The discovery shattered any remaining illusions. Prosecutors argued that Lori and Chad's talk of zombies was a cover for greed and lust. They wanted to rid themselves of spouses and children who stood in the way of their new life together, and to collect life insurance and Social Security benefits. In May 2023, a jury convicted Lori Vallow Daybell of the murders of Tylee and JJ and of conspiring to murder Tammy Daybell. She was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Chad Daybell's trial is pending, but prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. Today, Lori remains incarcerated in Idaho. Once a mother admired for her beauty and devotion, she is now remembered as the Doomsday Mom, a woman who let fanaticism, narcissism, and greed turn her into a killer. Her case stands as one of the most disturbing intersections of faith and violence in recent American history. Case number 8. Lacey Spears, the Salt Mom Munchausen case. In the age of social media, motherhood has become a performance, carefully curated snapshots of devotion, sacrifice, and love. Few embodied this image more convincingly than Lacey Spears, a young single mother from Decatur, Alabama, who later moved to New York. Online, she was celebrated as a warrior mom, tirelessly caring for her chronically ill son, Garnett. Through her blog Garnett's Journey, and a steady stream of Facebook and Instagram posts, she invited the world into their story. Her updates were constant. Photos of Garnett in hospital beds, heartfelt captions about his bravery, desperate pleas for prayers. Followers rallied to her side with sympathy, gifts, and donations. To thousands, she was a hero, a mother sacrificing everything for her fragile child. But it was all a deadly illusion. Behind the social media posts lay one of the most horrifying cases of Munchausen syndrome by proxy ever documented. From the time Garnett was an infant, Lacey fabricated illnesses, dragging him from doctor to doctor, convincing medical staff he was gravely sick. She claimed he had seizures, digestive disorders, and feeding problems. Eventually, she persuaded doctors to surgically insert a feeding tube into his stomach. That tube, meant to nourish, became her weapon. Over the years, Garnett was subjected to unnecessary procedures, hospital stays, and medications, all orchestrated by his mother. What doctors couldn't explain was why his sodium levels often spiked to dangerous levels. The truth was devastating. Lacey was poisoning her son with salt, secretly administering lethal doses through his feeding tube. In January 2014, Garnett was rushed to a hospital in Nyack, New York, with seizures. His sodium levels skyrocketed to a fatal level. As doctors scrambled to save him, Lacey was on her phone, posting updates online, portraying herself as a terrified, grieving mother. But suspicions grew. Hospital staff noticed her odd behavior. Security cameras captured her taking Garnett into a private bathroom with his feeding equipment. Each time she emerged, his condition worsened dramatically. On January 23, 2014, 5-year-old Garnett was declared brain dead. He had been killed not by illness, but by his own mother. The investigation uncovered chilling evidence. Police found feeding bags at Lacey's home contaminated with massive amounts of salt. Her internet search history included phrases like danger of high sodium in children and how to induce seizures. She had researched the very symptoms she pretended to battle. Even her personal life was built on lies. She told others Garnett's father was a police officer killed in an accident, when in reality he was alive and had tried to be part of his son's life. At trial in 2015, prosecutors painted Lacey as a manipulative woman who poisoned her child for attention, sympathy, and the social rewards of being seen as a martyr. Her defense argued she suffered from mental illness, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Today, Lacey Spears remains incarcerated in New York. Her case is a haunting reminder of the dangers of unchecked online validation. A mother who weaponized her child's health for likes and praise, and in the process, committed the ultimate betrayal. Case number 9, Casey Anthony, the Top Mom trial. In the summer of 2008, America was gripped by a mystery that began with a 2-year-old girl's disappearance and spiraled into one of the most controversial trials in modern history. The little girl was Kaylee Anthony, a bright, brown-eyed toddler from Orlando, Florida. Her mother, Casey Anthony, would soon become one of the most infamous names in true crime. Kaylee was last seen alive in mid-June 2008. But for the next 31 days, Casey told no one she was missing. While her parents, George and Cindy Anthony, begged to see their granddaughter, Casey dodged their calls. Instead, she partied at clubs, entered a hot body contest, and got a tattoo that read Bella Vita, the good life. When family pressed her, she spun a web of lies. She said Kaylee was with a nanny named Zani. She said she was working long hours at Universal Studios, though she had no job there. Every story unraveled. The truth began to surface on July 15, 2008, when Cindy Anthony finally tracked down Casey's abandoned car. The moment she opened it, she was overwhelmed by a stench she later described in a 911 call as smelling like there's been a dead body in the damn car. That call sparked a massive investigation. Confronted by police, Casey stuck to her tale of the mysterious nanny kidnapping Kaylee. Detectives followed her through apartment complexes and even to Universal Studios, where she walked them through the halls before finally admitting she didn't work there. Still, she refused to admit Kaylee was gone. In December 2008, the search came to a devastating end. A utility worker discovered a bag of skeletal remains in a wooded area less than half a mile from the Anthony home. Inside were Kaylee's bones, her tiny skull wrapped in duct tape. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide, though the exact cause was undetermined. By the time Casey went on trial in 2011, the case had become a national obsession. Prosecutors laid out a damning theory. Casey, a young woman who wanted freedom from motherhood, killed her daughter so she could return to a carefree life. They argued she used chloroform to sedate Kaylee and suffocated her with duct tape before storing the body in her car trunk and later dumping it in the woods. Forensic experts testified that hair in Casey's trunk showed signs consistent with decomposition, and that traces of chloroform were present. The defense countered with a shocking claim. Kaylee had accidentally drowned in the family's pool, and Casey panicked. Her father, George Anthony, they alleged, helped cover it up. They also suggested Casey's history of lies stemmed from years of sexual abuse by her father, a claim he strongly denied. For 6 weeks, the world watched every detail of the trial. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs demanding justice for Kaylee. Inside, jurors weighed circumstantial evidence against Casey's history of deception. On July 5, 2011, the verdict stunned the nation. Not guilty of murder, manslaughter, and child abuse. She was convicted only of lying to law enforcement. The public exploded in outrage. Casey Anthony was branded America's most hated mom. Protesters surrounded the courthouse. Legal analysts debated how the prosecution's case collapsed. Today, Casey Anthony lives in South Florida, largely reclusive. She has given occasional interviews, maintaining her innocence. But for millions, the trial remains a symbol of justice denied, a story of a child who never got her day in court, and a mother whose silence and lies became her lasting legacy. Case number 10, Megan Huntsman, Utah Garage Infant Murders. In Pleasant Grove, Utah, neighbors knew Megan Huntsman as a quiet woman with 3 school-aged daughters and a reputation for heavy drinking. Nothing about her modest suburban home hinted at the unimaginable secret she had kept hidden for over a decade. That secret would only come to light in April 2014, when a grisly discovery inside her garage horrified even seasoned investigators. It began when Darren West, her estranged husband who had just been released from federal prison on drug charges, returned to the house to clear out old belongings. As he sifted through boxes, he opened a small cardboard container sealed with tape. Inside, wrapped in plastic and cloth, was the tiny body of a decomposed newborn. Shocked, he called police immediately. What investigators found that day was beyond comprehension. Searching the garage, they uncovered 6 more boxes, each containing the remains of an infant. 7 tiny bodies, hidden for years just feet away from where Huntsman and her surviving children had lived their daily lives. When confronted, Megan Huntsman confessed with an eerie calm. Between 1996 and 2006, she said, she had secretly given birth 7 times. 1 baby, she claimed, was stillborn. The other 6, she admitted, she killed by suffocation or strangulation immediately after delivery. She would then wrap their bodies, place them in boxes, and store them in the garage. Her motive was chilling in its simplicity. Huntsman told police she was addicted to methamphetamine and alcohol and felt incapable of raising more children. Rather than seek help or consider adoption, she chose murder as a form of birth control. For 10 years, she repeated this cycle, hiding each pregnancy from family, friends, and even her husband, though Darren West was later confirmed by DNA testing to be the father of all 7 babies. The community of Pleasant Grove reeled. How could a woman conceal 7 full-term pregnancies in a small home without anyone noticing? How could she carry on with life, sending her daughters to school, cooking dinner, chatting with neighbors, while a private graveyard grew in her garage? The forensic evidence was heartbreaking. The level of decomposition made it impossible to determine the exact cause of death for each infant, but Huntsman's own confession left little doubt. She described her actions in detail, showing no signs of delusion or psychosis, only cold detachment. In court, Huntsman chose to plead guilty, sparing her surviving daughters the trauma of a public trial. At her 2015 sentencing, the judge called her crimes incredibly, utterly, horribly cold. He sentenced her to 6 terms of 15 years to life, ensuring she would likely spend the rest of her days in prison. Today, Megan Huntsman remains incarcerated at the Utah State Prison. She is remembered not as a woman who snapped in a single moment of despair, but as a serial killer who murdered her own children systematically for a decade. The Huntsman case is one of the most disturbing examples of neonaticide in American history. A stark reminder that sometimes the most horrifying secrets are not buried miles away, but boxed up in the corners of ordinary homes, hidden in plain sight.